right. So, actual first time host Mike here with occasional first time host Don, which is, maybe the first in a series where Doomer Optimism fans get to turn the spotlight on the hosts. We'll see if anyone else wants to do this. But at least my intent here is to learn a little bit more, or for the audience to learn more about the person behind the mic, because I've known Don here for 2 years, so I guess I know him a little bit. And then selfishly for me, every time we hang out with Don, we have 4 young kids across us, and so I never get to the level of depth that I want to get into. And so we'll hit on some like Doomer Optimism topics, but also we're just going to go down various other rabbit holes that maybe will connect back to the overall theme. So before we dive into any of that, I realized that in the Doomer Optimism world and on your former Twitter account, you're Donald, and I call you Don. Have I been?
Yeah, I go by both. I go by both.
But your wife calls you Don, and so have I entered the inner circle?
No, I'd say it's about 50-50 people in my life.
And did you intentionally start your name with the letters D-O to fit with
Yes.
you, like the
Yeah,
OG Doomer
it was
Optimist?
nomen omen est, as the Romans would say, name is fate.
There
So,
it goes. You were meant
yeah,
to be.
something like
So
that.
I wanted to start with the origin story because you no longer have a Twitter account, but we met on Twitter. And do I have the pleasure of being you have a lot of real life friends from Twitter, but am I your only local real life friend that you've made from Twitter? Or is that not fair?
I think that's right.
So the funny story of how we met is I think it was like on, maybe Jason's replies or just in the general, like even before Doomer Optimism was the thing in that sort of corner of Twitter. And I was heading out of town for a couple of days and I said, hey, is anyone in this, little corner of our state want some eggs? And you jumped at that opportunity. And I've since learned that you're a vegan. And I want to take this opportunity to get a straight answer from you on why you're a vegan, because there's a joke, like, how do you know someone's a vegan? Don't worry, they'll tell you. And I was a vegetarian for a couple of years. And if anyone asked me, I would lay out my 5 paragraph essay, persuasive essay on why everyone should be a vegetarian. You've not done that, which is fairly unique. So convince us all to be vegans.
Oh, I don't think that's going to happen. I'd say my reasons are probably too idiosyncratic at this point to convince anyone of anything. I don't know. I've been vegan for a really long time, 20 years, maybe. So the reasons have changed. I think when I was 16, I was like in the hardcore punk scene, like vegan straight edge scene. So my reasons were sort of straightforward animal rights reasons, discussed at industrial animal agriculture and not wanting to participate in that. And
I'll pause you there though. So I didn't know there was an association between what is the hardcore punk scene and how is it connected
yeah,
to
so
that?
you know, uh, I'm totally disconnected from it now. So I can't speak to what it looks like. But when I was a teenager, it looked like going to shows in basements and seeing bands play loud, angry music. Um, and I was even in a couple bands, not good ones. uh, Nothing worth remembering. But so I was in the punks, that scene in Cincinnati and in Lexington, Kentucky, and within that, there's sort of a subculture within a subculture of bands who are like veganism was a thing. a subculture within that subculture, I guess you could say. And I'm drawn by disposition towards black and white thinking, I guess you could say, maybe an intellectual vice of mine. And then I also really like rules. Uh, and so it suited me well um, to just say, like, drinking drugs, not once, not ever, and then veganism, same way. I like the clarity of it. I like that it's not an abstraction. That regardless about what you do, not what you believe. I think that's nice. And then I also think there's something um, that it's good to have commitments, uh, maybe even commitments about which one does not reason. To have unreasonable commitments, and that you get to discover the truth or perhaps the untruth of them only through commitment. So, a classic example of something like this, um, like that truth is revealed through fidelity. And so, making a commitment and then just sticking with it and seeing what happens. Now,
Has
obviously, you
anything
can make
shaken
a
your
bad.
commitment?
What was that?
Has anything ever shaken your commitment? Like the smell of bacon?
No, I don't feel any urges in that direction at all. And I think over time, like I don't buy the health arguments for veganism at all. I think it's possible, at least for me, to be healthy. I've had no problem putting on muscle mass, and I'm like live an active life. I feel fine. Um, some people don't have that experience. I don't know. I can't speak to that. But I don't. I find the health arguments for veganism to be really tedious. It's like obviously it's not the healthiest way to live or the easiest way to live healthy. Um, I find the kind of utilitarian ecological arguments to be pretty weak as well, honestly.
Yeah, explain that.
Um,
Because I think the first time I ever met you in person, I was like, I brought this up, and you're like, "Ooh, utilitarianism, you," or something along those lines, and I was like, "Oh." So, what do you mean by that?
uh, well, I mean, there's a couple problems with utilitarianism. One is how the heck can you possibly determine, like, even if you were to accept that utilitarianism is true, how could you possibly determine what is, has the greatest positive impact or whatever? That just seems you're entering into levels of complexity and um, that I just don't think is
Yeah,
knowable.
you can't model a complex system, and so if you're trying to be like an effective altruist, or there's people that are like,
Yeah.
yeah, they think they can model that, and then they're just deluding themselves.
So there's a problem of knowledge, but so that's one problem. But then beyond that, you have the um, I just don't. Even if the knowledge thing weren't right, I just don't think it's that I don't know, we're called to be um, to live virtuously, not to like maximize whatever. I don't know the utilitarian language. It's been a long
So
time.
yeah, so are like virtues in your worldview, I guess, fundamental that there's that there's I guess a right answer or a way to
I
live
guess
virtuously.
I'm allergic to the term worldview, but maybe we can talk about that later if you want. Um, yeah, I get how to put this. I mean, I'm a Christian, and so it's clear that you Jesus tells the story of the going for the one missing sheep, like leaving the 99 and going for the one missing sheep. Um, and there's no that there's no, in like what he calls us to do, there is absolutely nothing in it that's anything even approximating utilitarianism.
Hmm.
It's all about the person that's in front of you that you're encountering, and that you act um, without, yeah. There's no, so I guess, yeah, utilitarianism. I don't know. There's a lot of people who've made much better arguments against it. Um, I don't read much philosophy anymore.
I mean, I'm not well versed in philosophy either, but
But
it's
anyway,
interesting that,
anyway,
yeah,
I
it seems
find
like
those vegan
Jesus has answered
arguments.
the trolley problem with that sheep parable. Like that sort
Well,
of
I would say the trolley problem is an
analogous.
evil thing for people to think about. That I think it's a terrible thing that a professor gets in front of a group of young people and has them visualize killing
Hmm.
as a thought experiment. I think that's the opposite of moral education. I don't think we should entertain ideas like that. It's not helpful.
Interesting.
It's not
I hadn't
helpful at
thought about that,
all.
but it's true.
Like, what does
I
it
mean, I
teach
guess.
you? It doesn't teach you anything. It's not. Um, but obviously, yeah, we shouldn't murder. That's that goes without saying. It should go without saying. Um, and so, yeah, so the arguments for veganism, and then I find, yeah, the environmental argument. I don't know. I mean, um, obviously, you can. It's not hard to imagine a vegan world, whatever the heck that means. That's incredibly ecologically destructive.
Yeah, I mean, people make that
Just as the
argument, right?
alternative. So I think it's funny that people complain about soybeans as production as though that were the fault of vegans. When it's almost all of it is for animal feed. So anyway, I think the people like hate the anti-vegan stuff. I don't find persuasive either. Um, and then as I've gotten older and was received into the Orthodox Church, I think that there's an ascetic tradition within the church of um, basically veganism. I mean, that's how monks eat, and so I guess I'm more drawn to that. Though, in my actual day-to-day experience of life, I don't find my diet, even if it might look like it from the outside, to be. I don't experience it as deprivation or asceticism exactly. Same with the abstention from intoxicants. I don't experience that as a lack, but I suppose on paper it looks like asceticism.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense that it's especially, I mean, most substances are a double-edged sword, and so to the extent that there's any upside in terms of intoxicants, there's often the downside, which is could be more sharp. So
And then
I
I just
agree with that.
I think there's another, I don't know, sort of mystical level to veganism, which it is in some way an attempt to like life um, in the garden, you know, that man was created like it to live without killing.
Hmm. And when you
Or
say the
something
garden,
like
you
that.
mean like the Garden of Eden?
Yes.
It's interesting. I feel like criticisms I hear of Christianity are sort of that it perpetuates or establishes this narrative of man's dominion over nature. You're saying that's not the case, at
Oh
least in
no, it
terms of
absolutely does
Marxism.
establish man's dominion over nature, but man's dominion over nature is very good.
So, like, what do you call it in the ecological space? Like, a man should be a steward, not a like. How does agriculture then fit into that?
Yeah, absolutely, man should be a steward. Um, so yeah, agriculture is good and necessary, and there's no other way to. There's no alternative, I don't think, for living with this many people anyway. So
Yeah, the ship
and
has
also
sailed.
at this point, like there was a point of like in North America where there were few enough people and there was enough sort of natural abundance that it was possible for people to live, sort of like nomadic hunters and so on. But even then, we have really active management of the land via intentional, setting of forest fires. And so I don't know. We now know that the Amazon rainforest was the result of human activity. So yeah, of course we have dominion over nature. I think that a lot of our problems come from uh, the attempt to, or the refusal of that responsibility, and basically the outsourcing of it to large
Yeah.
agribusiness and the U.S. Forest Service or whatever.
So that's actually, so you've touched on a couple of threads that I want to follow. One of which is Orthodox Christianity. Um, Maybe we'll return to punk rock as well, and also just teenage Dom. Before we get there, I think this is a good transition point to sort of like a Doomer optimism question: is what is your doom? You're kind of touching on potential. Like I know for you, at least from our conversations and the conversations you've had in the podcast, for a lot of people these days, climate change is a big one. You have a degree of, people with larger vocabulary would say like epistemic humility. You're just like you're like, I don't know if we could fully understand climate change, so that's not necessarily your doom. But you're touching on things that are maybe related in terms of ecological destruction. And so as you see, you think about doomer optimism. Yeah, what was your flavor of doom?
Yeah, the thing I've been saying lately is that we don't have to worry about some future doom event, that the cataclysm has already happened. Um, so I think intellectually, spiritually, it's already happened. Clearly, we don't. There's no need to worry, and you don't have to worry about it
And
because it
and do
already
you mean
happened.
that that's sort of like the death of God and loss of meaning, or what's the spiritual cataclysm that's happened, and when did it happen?
Yeah, I wouldn't say the death of God, but I I think the more you read old books, the clearer the sort of spiritual and intellectual poverty of the present becomes. And so the attrition of attention, um, and I I don't know. It's sort of so many things at once that you kind of feel like a crazy person talking about it. It's sort of, you just end up like waving your hands around. Everything is wrong, something like that. Um, so yeah, I mean, we had this what might, in retrospect, be sort of a brief flourishing of mass literacy that seems to be closing, um, and the disappearance um, of poetry and partnered dancing and so on, as um, group singing as part of like normal life and culture. Like those things persist, but as subcultures. uh, the like the the disappearance of public religious life, the disappearance of children, more is probably the starkest one. Um, that uh, and sort of that loss of, I don't know how to put it, morale and desire for life, that the absence of children is indicative of. And it's even worse some places than it is some places is much worse even than here. But I'd say all those things would be my doom, and then sort of the ecology too. I mean, I don't think I have anything really original to say in that regard. Um, you know,
On the sort of, I guess, how I would try to characterize it is like the hollowing out of the like social, cultural, religious, and spiritual realms by, I mean, there's probably no one causative agent, but like the market, the state, technology. Is
yeah,
that
so
how you see it?
absolutely. Yeah, the bureaucratization of life. Yeah, the hollowing out of American social life. Um, and like mass affluence is definitely a marker of American life, and that turns out to be nice in some ways, I guess, but to not be conducive um, to to flourishing on the individual or communal level. Yeah,
So I guess the question from the doom perspective is, yeah, these are probably trends that have been going on since the beginning of like domestication of animals potentially, but also like it obviously more visible in the last 100 years and then the post World War II period. When you think about like consumer culture and like, so what was when the Kardashians became popular? Is that when you reached a low, or is it like we're still on, like it could get much lower, right? Or are you saying like
well,
the doom's already happened?
yeah. So I think the collapse has already happened. I think that there are some good things happening too. Like I'm really heartened by the rise of homeschooling. I think that's been really nice. Sort of counter uh, something moving in a different direction. I think, and it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I think it's still to the full impact of that is hasn't hasn't um, really been felt. But I don't know. I mean, yeah, like the complaints about technology. I mean, all these things have become cliches at this point. Um, and where to mark the beginning? I mean, the joke is like you can always find someone who moves it back earlier. You know, like Heidegger moves it really early and so on. But I think it's kind of silly to just pick some really early thing and then um, like von Illich is really interested in like the 11th century, 12th century. Heidegger, it goes all the way back to like the pre-Socratics. But at some point you just reach some level of you such a broad view and things become so abstract that you can kind of say anything. So I'm not sure how useful that is actually to pinpoint some particular moment. I think that it's clear that some social forms and some technology, some ideas are bad. uh you know um So, and we're like what, a century in to the kind of bureaucratic experiment, um, like begun in the New Deal, and yeah, things don't aren't going very well now. So, but I don't have some grand scheme to replace things with either.
Well, I mean, you mentioned homeschooling, and I want to talk to you about that. You also obviously are bringing a certain thread of thought, like I guess literary thought and other things to the Doomer Optimism ecosystem. And so, like, how do you think about, yeah, like what is your optimism, and also like what are you trying to what flavor of conversations have you been having and are trying to have on the podcast?
Yeah, so uh, I think renewal, the collapse already happened. So renewal happens one person, one family at a time. Um, and I think that happens through reflection and creation. So we like at some level, like people need to have children and they need to create things in order for anything to move forward at all. Um, and it seems like uh, the critici- the posture of being critical of technology isn't wrong, but we have like something like a half century of very good, more than half century. I mean, you can read like Ruskin and Wordsworth and so on, writing about industrialism, great stuff. All through the 20th century, you had that flowering in mid 20th century, Illich and Postman and so on, all of whom were more right than even they knew. And then none of it really did anything, especially the mid-century stuff. Um, and so I'm not sure how much value there is anymore in just being critical. Uh, and so, yeah, I think like I love literature and poetry, and so I think it's good to talk about and bring people into and attempt to write it and share it with other people. Um, and then homeschooling too, um, just raising children who get are around beauty a lot, um, and get to experience beautiful things and learn to love them. And and then I don't know where the whole like big picture stuff falls out, kind of beyond my ability to do much about, I think. But in my limited experience, it seems like it's possible to bring people together to do um, to actually think about things and read books together, and it's possible to get kids together to do good stuff. And we do a homeschool co-op once a week. We're keeping that going over the summer. We're going to start another one in the fall. So we're going to do that twice a week um, with my kids and some other families, and then I don't know. Yeah, I mean, like sometimes I worry there's going to be almost a speciation event about kids who are playing in the woods a lot, and um, being able to do sort of classical kids stuff, like unsupervised play and physical things. And like, we were on the beach yesterday, and my younger daughter is just overturning every rock and finding crabs and just doing classic kid stuff. And then the screen kids, you know, and
These are hard to
like
see.
those two kids are growing up in different worlds effectively, and I don't know how they're going to be relate to each other as they get older. Um,
I
like
think,
maybe at some point, kids will the kids who are just had screens put in their faces all the time will just get sick of it. I don't
I
know.
mean, it has the potential to exacerbate. So it's interesting to use the word speciation because I think Zach Stein, who I've recommended to you, who's like philosopher of education and writes on this, was talking on a podcast recently. If you play it forward with AI raising our kids and VR headsets, and think as it's not as dystopian or as it's like basically the reality in the next 5-10 years.
But who wants
And
that? Who
it,
wants that? Really? Like I am totally perplexed by the AI stuff. The
I meet
images
plenty
it
of parents that don't want anything to do with using their kids, and so I
the
think
images it produces are ugly. They are ugly. All of them. The writing it produces is ugly. Everything it produces is bad. I've been having a thought, trying to think of another technology that has quickly spread ugliness around the world, and I can't think of another one. It's like you flick a switch and the amount of ugliness just like goes up exponentially. And I think the only reason those things have had any staying power at all is just that of how inured to ugliness all of us have become. And if you never read good writing or look at anything beautiful, then I guess that stuff can seem impressive. But is anyone actually impressed? I don't know. I'm actually just totally perplexed by by any excitement about those things.
Well, like you said, I mean, there does seem to be, you know, people going down that path, and like maybe the general system as a whole, and then what you're trying to do, and what small groups of people are trying to do. So
But
on
it's
that
so
point, I wanted to
energy
ask.
intensive too, right? The computing needed to create all those ugly things is hugely energy intensive. So now there's talk of making like small scale nuclear reactors just to run the computing to do this junk. And so we're gonna, I don't know, it makes me feel like a crazy person. Like we're gonna go all in and just to make garbage. I don't know. It really perplexes me, you know. Like like I can understand the argument for a very energy intensive um like global economy because now I can go to Costco any day of the week and buy delicious berries all year round. Now we can argue that that's ecologically bad, et cetera, but no one can say with a straight face that it isn't delicious and convenient and so on. So there are some like very energy intensive things that maybe if you zoom out a little bit, you can understand that they're destructive to life, and yeah, we should be eating local food that's seasonal, blah blah blah. Okay, okay. But at the same time, it's like, oh, these amazing like what berries from Peru and Mexico and so on all year round, and that the giant container ships and so on. It we take for I think we take for granted a lot of that stuff, like the stuff of American affluence, um, and then it does like benefit us in some direct way. But the AI stuff, I see no benefit whatsoever. It just seems sort of abject.
I mean, I think what will happen, or what's already happening, is people will make the equity argument of, teachers are overworked and underpaid, which is 100% the case, and they have a class of 25 kids, and doesn't each kid deserve their own AI agent that's modeled after Socrates or their AI tutor? And, then everyone could go at their own pace, and everyone gets a more equitable access to education. So there's certainly like there will be arguments, or there are arguments that they then could get us into. I think I agree with you, sort of uh, a speciation event where there's kids being raised largely by AIs, and AIs are being trained on like mostly the awfulness of the internet, or all the content that's been generated over the last 100 years, um, which is just like a completely new, like who's to say what that will result in, but it seems dangerous.
I mean, it's gonna mostly be used for pornography, I think, ultimately, isn't it? I,
Probably if you were to survey, yes, if you give a 15-year-old boy technology, what will it be used for? So
Not for tutoring kids in math or whatever. But then even so, I mean, like what is education? What is the purpose of education? Now I think Like I met with a young woman who's in the education school here. She wanted to meet with me. And it was an interesting conversation. I was really curious mostly about the attitudes towards technology at the education college here. And in her account of it, um, the attitude was wholly uncritical. It was just full speed ahead. And what she and what I understand to be most college students do now is she just feeds her reading assignments into the machine, and then it spits out a little summary. So before you had to like go to Barnes and Noble to buy Spark Notes, but now it's instant Spark Notes, and that's how she does her reading. But what's the point of that? Like either A, the readings are dumb, like anything that's that easily summarized, why are you assigning it in the first place? But two, at some level you're just checking out of thinking. But then why are you in school? Like why go to college? You know, why? Is it more efficient? But why is that the goal of education? Efficiency. I mean, it seems better to me, I don't know, to be stuck with like old, even outdated books with which you're forced to read and think about. And we're like we were doing yesterday. I gave the kids a math problem, and we just did it like on picnic tables by the beach with popsicle sticks. It was an interesting problem, and the kids worked on it for a while. But that they actually got that experience of encountering a problem to which the answer was not immediately obvious, and they had to work on it for a while. That seems valuable to me. Why having like an AI thing tell you math answers? I don't know. I just don't. At some point, I don't understand what the point is. Why not just not
So
learn at all
yeah,
at that
and
point?
so
Like, why not just check out of thinking and so on entirely?
well,
Why even
yeah,
go through the motions?
certain. I mean, that is the it seems like a key part of the modern education system, and a lot of bureaucratic systems is like yeah, just about jumping through the hoops. And so yeah, if you could find a way to more easily jump through the hoops, then you should take it in the
Just give the
current
kids high
system. And
school
so
diplomas in kindergarten
right, it's
and send them
the
home to play video games or whatever. Like, I don't, like, if we're just going to go down that road, I don't know why. Like, what's the point of spending all that money and so on? Um,
so
I mean,
what's
the
your
teachers is
alternative?
overworked
So
and teachers is
for
overworked and underpaid. I don't know if I totally buy that, by the way, but anyway.
so the listeners probably don't know, but you've started an alternative to high school. Um, is that's how you still frame it? And so, like, tell us a little bit about that and like how you're thinking about it. Part of the slogan is "No screens," and so I think you've made your views clear there.
Yeah, so it's a
What are you hoping to
program.
help kids with?
It's not a high school, but it's a program for high schoolers. That may be an important distinction. We only meet 2 days a week. Yeah, so it's a program where we don't use screens at all. It's all paper and pencil and books and so on. So we do um, a curriculum of ancient Greek and mathematics, literature, place-based learning, a combination of local history, especially pre-European native history, local ecology, uh, and lots of lots of conversation, lots of writing. Um, asking a lot of teenagers and giving them serious things to think about, um, serious books to read, and just doing it without uh, digital distractions or political pressure. I think a lot of education now is very political and political in multiple directions. Um, and so, like I understand politics as public political life, like attempting to make decisions and advocate for things in the public. Uh, and education, well, one, that politics and public life is for adults. And I think that there's a move by which adults try to live vicariously through the young. Like they
in the worst possible
abdicate
way.
they abdicate their responsibility uh, and place it like, the young people will solve all the world's problems, as if it were the responsibility of children and so on. Like friends of mine whose kids are in public school here, the grade school kids had did some presentation, and like all the kids were like talking about climate change and all these things, as if like fifth graders should be thinking about stuff like this at all. So there's this abdication by adults and placing on children the responsibility for fixing things and so on, which I think is horrible. Kids shouldn't worry about that junk. But then also just creates a lot of political pressure. And so we're not going to do that at all. We're going to, just going to spend the time we have together every week just learning Greek and reading, Mark Twain and Homer and all that.
Two threads I want to pull
With,
on there, if you don't mind me interrupting, is
yeah,
I feel like
please.
for listeners of Doomer Optimism, like a lot of that, like I feel like people are would be bought in. For me, what I'm curious about is two things. So one, you dropped out of high school, right?
Yes.
And then also then you went on to study the classics at like a very prestigious university, and so ancient Greek and Hebrew and some other languages as well. And so how do those two experiences inform, like obviously you're going to be teaching these kids ancient Greek,
Hmm.
and then obviously I don't know any of that your backstory in terms of dropping out of high school. I'm assuming it was because it was too boring, but maybe you were also rebellious. So how do those two things feed into
Yeah.
this
So I
this
think that
program?
it was a combination of hubris and rebelliousness and um, yeah, I think that there's actually a lot of danger in autodidactism, in terms of like having too much an elevated sense of um, self and capabilities. So I don't know if I would exactly suggest my path, like what I did when I was 16, but yeah, when I discovered I could take the GED test in 4 hours and get a high school diploma that way instead of going to school for 2 more years, I jumped on that. And the high school I went to was fine. I had friends. I wasn't in some like terrible situation, but I think I had yeah, I wasn't very teachable in a way I regret now in some ways. On the other hand, what was really good for me was really realizing my agency and realizing that I was capable of just doing things. So when I was a teenager, I moved to Kentucky and I rented a room in a shotgun apartment. I paid $60 a month for that room. And it was a gross apartment, but the rent was amazingly cheap. And I spent a lot of time just hanging out with friends and listening, going to shows and all that stuff. And I was working at FedEx. Um, but my cost of living was so low that my friends and I opened a music venue when I was a teenager. We didn't have permits or anything. And we actually broke even. We ran enough shows. Eventually the city shut us down, not surprisingly. Like we didn't have insurance. Like we didn't have anything. We weren't incorporated. We just, I don't know why that guy leased us a building, but realizing you could just do things, that was interesting. And I traveled a bit. Uh, and when I was traveling, I really just made it a point to just talk, meet people and start conversations with anyone, not say no to things. Anyway, so that was really powerful for me, and I think that school sort of teaches the opposite. You have this um, school mindset is really like you had to go through gatekeepers for everything. Like even just like the moving up through grades, it's all through like gatekeepers passing you along. And then college admissions is sort of the ultimate gatekeeper event, and that is for middle class Americans like the coming of age event. I think you do your like college tours, SAT, all that stuff, and it's just this training and bureaucratic life of like in order to move through stages of life, you had to just have these gatekeepers let you through. Very terrible lesson to teach young people, and then college that just continues. If you do like grad school admissions or applying for jobs, um, applying for grants and things, in every step of the way, it's like you take some active role, but ultimately you're like placing yourself in the hands of someone else who gives you the thumbs up or the thumbs down. And that's the way of life that's trained in schools and trained in universities. And then carried on if you're like working corporate jobs or whatever. So having an experience of not that at all, but an experience of like, oh yeah, just being able to, if you want to do something, just doing it without permission and just creating things. Um, which is the ethos certainly of the punk scene, at least in some ways. It was back then, and um, so that was helpful. It was interesting when I decided to go to college in my mid 20s and study Greek and so on. The I really slid back into a lot of the that stuff. It's very hard when you're in that environment not to. Um,
Yeah. And so to on that point, since you brought it back home to ancient Greek, how does that like what's the this is a pretty like utilitarian way of asking the question, but what's the value in studying ancient Greek? What do you hope to like bring to the kids you're teaching?
yeah, I mean, why Greek? Partially just because I love it and because I'm capable of teaching it. Is the I mean, if the language I knew was I think learning foreign languages is fun and interesting. If I knew Swedish, I guess I would be teaching Swedish. Um, Ancient Greek has a lot going for it though. It's really hard and it's really rewarding, so that's good. The things written in it are really interesting. So you get like the corpus of classical Greek is a lot larger than that of classical Latin. Now Latin extent, you get this whole um, like post classical Latin thing. It's just huge. It's just immense amounts of it. But um, and with Greek, we get a view into the development, like the birth of human culture, that's been preserved. It happened lots of places, but just with the Greeks, for a variety of historical reasons, it's been preserved, and so you know we get this really rare and privileged view into that. But I think ultimately, I just love it, and so that's why
Yeah, I know, and it seemed like you were saying.
that's why I want to teach it. And I think yeah, it's really hard. I mean, there's just um, no way around it. But I think the experience of learning a language uh, is really good. And Greek, you don't get. Sometimes when you learn a language, you get then the experience of being able to communicate with someone you weren't otherwise able to. And with ancient Greek, we don't get that. There's no native ancient Greek speaker on Earth. Modern Greek is, similar in the same way that like modern English is similar to Old English, but they're not. I mean, the language has changed a lot, and that's just a natural part of language. So, and it remains to be seen whether that many people want to do it here.
I mean, I'm convinced from the conversations we've had about it. I think I'm curious if there's a connection. Maybe this is too much of a stretch, but you love ancient Greek. You are Greek Orthodox. You're not Greek. You weren't raised Greek Orthodox. Like, how did you find your way into Orthodox Christianity, and is it related at all to
Sure.
The classics?
I guess I should preface this by saying I'm Orthodox. I think the preface Greek or Russian or Serbian, I mean, it's all just Orthodox. So I don't actually feel, I mean, I go to a Greek parish and I love my parish, but I don't feel any particular affinity for like modern Greek culture or something. I mean, I would love to go to Greece. I think the Greek language is neat. I love my church, but if it had been, like an OCA parish or a Serbian parish or whatever, that would be fine. I wouldn't like go out of my way to find a Greek church. So I don't know how. I think it's nice that I can follow along with the Greek. It's mostly English, but we use some Greek in the liturgy, and I'm able to follow along with it. That's nice. Though it's pronounced in the modern Greek pronunciation, and that really throws me for a loop. Like the A's are pronounced E in modern Greek, and that still throws me off. Just because how I was taught A's are pronounced A. Like every vowel becomes E in modern Greek. It's interesting. So yeah, orthodoxy. I mean, ultimately, I'm Orthodox because I think it's true. I had the experience of I was attending like an Episcopal church here. I really liked the kids programs at it. I liked the music. It was pretty high church. I liked the liturgy. Every Sunday we would recite the Nicene Creed, and I knew that the Episcopal Church was not the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. I don't think anyone in that Episcopal parish believed that. And so it's like, okay, if I actually believe that the Nicene Creed is true, then I need to be part of the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. I think the Orthodox Church is that. And then
Because
Orthodoxy is just,
it has its roots in the beginning of Christianity, or like how?
yeah,
Why
I
is that
think
the
it was
case?
founded. I think there's like this last Sunday we commemorated the fathers of the First Ecumenical Council. First Ecumenical Council is the one that wrote down the Nicene Creed, that agreed on the Nicene Creed, which is the Nicene, like Metropolitan Jonah Paffhausen, who's an Orthodox bishop. He said that basically Orthodox dogmatics more or less consists of the Nicene Creed. Um, the great Western medieval scholastic project of like elucidating the faith as this whole system, and this great production of dogmatic theology that just didn't occur in the East. Um, so Orthodox Christianity, yeah, I guess it resolves or avoids a lot of the antinomies that define Christianity in the West, like free will versus predestination, classic irresolvable Western argument, like or faith versus works, another classic Western antinomian. Those debates either didn't happen or not just not an important question in the East, which is really refreshing. I think that there's been um, the just just another example, like the way the East understands. Well, actually, to go back to the First Ecumenical Council, Nicene Creed, we just commemorated that on Sunday, and it's very clear in liturgy on Sundays that what we are doing is part of the same thing as what the fathers of the First Ecumenical Council were doing. Like that,
Which is what?
when in commemorating them. So there's this continuous, 2,000-year tradition that's preserved in Orthodoxy. I think that's clear to me. Both, which isn't to say that things have never changed. The liturgy has obviously changed. Anyone, like we celebrate the liturgy of Saint John Chrysostom, which that's like centuries into the existence of the church that comes together in its particular way, and then it's been modified at various points throughout. So no one has had some idea that things never change. That's really silly. And obviously, yeah, things have changed over time, and there have been debates and new things have been discovered. But I think that there's uh, clearly a continuous tradition, like that. If you took a Christian from the 2nd century or the 4th century and plopped him down into an Orthodox liturgy today, he would recognize it. And then the theology is clearly continuous too. The Orthodox theology is always looking back to the Church Fathers, both, and then same with our liturgy. There's that's what gets referenced over and over and over again in homilies and so on. So we have a continuous tradition of 2,000 years, and then the Orthodox emphasis on prayer and asceticism, I really like, and is good
Like
for
more
me.
of a practice than a belief.
Well, it's that those two. There's no distinction between those two.
Mm.
Um, and so when I was first getting interested in Orthodoxy, the priest I was talking with, he's like, "Okay, what you need to do is say your morning and evening prayers every day. Have a prayer rule, um, and uh, come to liturgy on every Sunday." Um, with the goal, and the fathers are just say this over and over again, is that to not judge anyone, consider yourself the worst sinner in the world, um, to keep a prayer rule, come to liturgy, love God, serve the poor. Very simple, not easy at all, but very simple. And that teaching and that practice is continuous. Um,
To tie it back
and
to where we
yeah,
started, sorry to interrupt, is on the Doomer Optimism front and cultural renewal. There's certainly been a lot of discourse around sort of religion and spirituality, and do you see, like, yeah, I guess, does a religious renewal have to be at the core of what comes next for there to be a broader cultural renewal? You've gone incognito by leaning
oh
backwards.
wow, look at that. Yeah, I mean it's hard to think in like broad questions like that. I would say for me, uh, I can't imagine um, like that my life without spiritual practice in the church would be really impoverished. And do we have, like, is there any example of history of like flourishing culture uh, without worship of God? Not that I know of. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. And we're at the strange point now where I think, and maybe you have better insight to this than I do, like atheism doesn't seem to be any mass adoption of atheism at all. Like there was this brief attempt to make atheism a thing, which I think in retrospect was clearly just part of the general war effort of the global war on terror. Like
Mm.
the new
Yeah, it
atheists, I
certainly
think we're just
was.
we're just part
They
of
were certainly emerged in prominence post 2001 with
yeah, I think
various
that was
movements and so on.
just like a war effort, honestly, of like
Yeah.
that they were able to sort of push the envelope in terms of talking about Islam and get people sort of riled up and excited about fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan and so on. And then as soon as those wars petered out, new atheism disappeared. So I don't think that's a coincidence. So atheism seems really untenable, and it's just not. There's just no life in it, and so there's no, like, how do you, even like these dorks, like, I don't even remember their names. Now they're kind of pushing the new age, like the new age atheism, where they're all about like meditation and spirituality and so on for atheists. So, like, they couldn't even keep it up for very long. They had to reach, yeah, like Sam Harris and so on. Anyway, just pretty embarrassing all around, I'd say. And there's just nothing there. Very few people sort of can take atheism all the way. Uh, but it's very, very dark thing. So what seems to be emerging now is a sort of general, like, new age paganism is definitely, I think, taking hold in a serious way. Like I've been really struck by in recent years. Um, I've heard this said by a bunch of people of like, oh, I really, I'm trying to do less like Christmas and Christian holidays and move more towards like solstices and things. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with commemorating a solstice. Like my family does that, but it's interesting how explicitly people contrast that with celebrating Christian holidays, and then people are attempting to resurrect or create from scratch these kind of pagan-ish practices, which is sort of nature worship and uh, animism, maybe a little bit. But again, then divorced from the actual history and practice of those things. Like we know, like pre-Christian pagan Europe, there's a kind of rosy view of what that looked like. But I don't think people really. I mean, so every morning I read the life of a saint, most of whom, most of the ones I read about were martyred in really brutal and grisly ways by um, their pagan uh, countrymen and rulers. And I think the level of disregard for individual human life is hard to imagine because we've all been coddled in Christian or Christianish
Mm.
culture. Uh, the film The Northman, which, did you see that?
I have seen it, yeah.
And so I thought that was good in that it really showed like pre-Christian. Well, there are Christian characters in it, but like the pre-Christian, like Viking thing where they're just like human sacrifice, and it's not depicted in the film, and I'm glad it's not depicted. But the funeral right at the end, where there's the young one who was sacrificed, We know that's based on a real historical account of a Viking funeral, and the woman is gang raped before she is sacrificed. And I'm glad the film did not depict that, but that's the reality of. And so obviously, it's like, okay, people want paganism without the blood. They want like a happy-go-lucky paganism without the rape and murder. And ultimately, I just think like it's if you have, it just becomes like the Hallmark card paganism or something. Like it's really shallow, and so there's not enough there to actually create human
It's
culture. Not that I'm
yeah,
encouraging people to start doing human sacrifice. I would much rather have the Hallmark version than the real thing. And I'm glad people are interested in spirituality and trying to be attuned to that. I think that's a good, much better than a kind of antiseptic nothing. But I just don't think there's much there. And I think that people need there. Ultimately, like you had to be, um, and there's not much there, and it's also um, just not true or not fully true. Uh, it's missing something.
it's funny you mentioned the hallmarkification of it, because I was about to say something similar in a different sense. Because guilty as charged is someone that has gone the route of being raised Catholic, fallen into the new atheists in 2001 and listening to Sam Harris a bunch, and then broadly exploring religions and spirituality in Eastern and Western and so on, and being just utterly confused currently, and starting a family, trying to going through the process of celebrating solstices and trying to revive maybe some neo-pagan traditions, and realizing that Christianity has sort of adapted and pulled through obviously all of these pagan traditions as part of the core holidays, and so it's not, things don't need to be invented out of whole cloth, and almost what needs to happen with a lot of the Christian holidays is the de-hallmarkification of them, the
Yeah,
de-consumerification of it. Because like the way I've experienced those holidays growing up, and still the way sort of our boomer parents and in-laws treat them, is it's all about like literal Hallmark cards and candy and food and presents and Easter bunnies and Santa Claus and nothing else. Completely stripped of all meaning and reflection and love and everything that could, like, maybe I'm being overly harsh, like obviously there's conviviality and so on, but yeah, I think there's, to close sort of that thought, there's, I've been wondering about this whole thread, and that's why I'm asking about Orthodox Christianity, of like, yeah, where will the cultural renewal come from? There are a lot of people that are identify as nuns and that are spiritual but not religious, right? And yeah, like I don't know, I probably have to run here in a minute because my family just got home. I guess, do you have closing thoughts on that? As like cultural renewal as one of the things we're trying to, or you're thinking of, but like how do you do your part in that, your small part?
yeah.
But
I'd say
yeah,
Orthodox Christianity also offers us a lot of ancient ritual practices that some people dismiss as superstitious. Of
mm,
like, so appealing to saints for to pray for us, kissing icons. Like I had my office blessed by my priest, and so he's like walking around flinging holy water on everything and saying prayers and all that stuff, which I think is just really connects us to ancient. Like you read the Old Testament, and there's all kinds of wild stuff in there. It's like sacrificing birds over clay pots and thing, to cleanse houses, and it seems so foreign. It's not just sort of the like abstract adoption of doctrine or something, but we actually get the direct continuation of that practice in especially popular devotions and rituals of the church. So there's a meme of Orthodox priests blessing things, and you can find like literally an image of an Orthodox priest blessing like every thing imaginable. We bless the water every year, so we go down to Bellingham Bay and we say prayers and throw a cross in the water, and someone goes out and swims and retrieves it. Um, and that the eschatological vision of the Orthodox Church is the blessing of everything for the divinization of everything. That being saved in the Orthodox Church is theosis. Is, it's like Saint Athanasius said, God became man so that man could become God. Um,
Mm.
and I think opening ourselves to that, allowing ourselves participation in these old rituals and opening ourselves to spiritual life in that way is very good. And not having a full explanation for everything, like Orthodox theology is really apophatic, so it accepts mystery, and that's okay. We don't have to have a fully, systematic, logical explanation of everything. So cultural renewal, yeah, I don't know. That's what I'm doing. So I guess invite other people to try it, to see and taste it, and but I think like the Doomer Optimism project. I mean, I think it's succeeded or been encouraging to the extent that it's given people permission to experiment and to do things without worrying about everyone agreeing necessarily on politics and whatever. So that's been nice. And I don't know, I could probably do more active experimentation too. Like, I wish I had a little more land to experiment on. I guess you have, maybe we could talk to others. I don't
You could
know.
experiment
I
here.
don't know if there's any interest at all in this conversation out there in the world, but I mean, you know, you and your wife are gardening on a much bigger scale than I am, and experimenting with things, and have had successes and failures with that already that you're just going to keep learning from. Um, like I have my like raised bed gardens and um, my blueberry bushes and so on, which we've learned a lot in doing that. Uh, I think it's going to be a pretty good year for me in the garden, which and much better than last year was a disaster. So we learned a lot, and it's going to be a better year. So I don't know. I think it's like I'm sorry. I'll close with this. That the path forward, at least for me, but I think for other people, it's stuff that is simple but not easy.
Mm. I
So it's
like
like
that.
don't judge others, say your prayers, go to church, have kids, grow food, uh, read read beautiful things, try to write beautiful things, look at beautiful art, try to make beautiful art. Okay, it's very simple, not easy. Um, and yes, I know like Wendell Berry. Actually, that stuff is not simple at all. Complex. Okay, yes, yes, yes. But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's like I don't think we have to do anything really uh, far reach. Like I think that the sort of grand visions. I used to be really attracted to that sort of thing. But I think um, those grand visions really have a tendency, at least for me, make uh, to give me a tyrannical soul, and so
Yeah.
I'm going to try to stay away from them.
No, and it sounds like, from the conversations I've heard on optimism, like everyone shares that ethos, right? There's not too many like totalizing visions. It's pretty, I don't know if libertarian's the right word, but like, yeah, like no one's trying to say like my way is the right way, which is, yeah, rare in the modern discourse. And so I appreciate that.
But in
I'm
the
tempted to
depth of
say
my
so many
heart,
more things.
in the depth of my heart, I do feel that my way is the right way.
Well,
I
I mean,
just
you have
don't.
to, otherwise, why would you do it?
I obviously, but
You're not
but
trying to push on others.
Yeah, but I think like that my wife reminds me of this a lot, that the things that make sense to me and work for me aren't shared by most. Like, I love rules. Like, yes, every morning I will get up and I will say my prayers and I will do uh pull-ups and I will do, like I have a very like set routine of life, and then when I decide something, I just do it forever and never think about it again. Um and apparently that's not how most people operate.
Yeah, I'm
Uh
certainly not like that. I'm tempted. I had one question I didn't ask that since you just mentioned Barry, you've mentioned Illich. I feel like I wanted to be like Wendell Berry, Illich, fill in the blank. Like, who are the godfathers, godmothers of Doomer Optimism slash who should I read next?
yeah, well, the secret backstory of Doomer Optimism you can read about on the Borges Review of Books. It
Oh,
involves
nice.
like the Kijik people of the Caucasus Mountains. So anyway, that's the deep backstory of Doomer Optimism. But who to read next? Yeah, I'm looking at one of my bookshelves now. I don't know. I mean, there's so many things to read. I've been this summer. I've been returning to Plato, which has been really interesting. I don't know how much help it gives in the Doomer Optimism direction. Um, and I'm gonna be leading a community seminar on Dante this summer. Uh, so who to read? I don't know. Yeah, but yeah, I guess it's been really nice going back to the ancients lately. So that's what I would say.
Love
Uh,
it.
like Plutarch and Plato and all these things. I think there's a lot there, still a lot there, uh, and so strange. Plato is so strange. We have no,
Well, that
we
fits
don't
with the theme.
we don't understand half of what he's saying. I think he's still 10 steps ahead of us.